The night watch at the tidal pool. The coast settles into evening slowly, without hurry or announcement. The sun has slipped beneath the horizon some time ago, leaving behind only the softest wash of purple light along the western edge of the sky. That light fades gradually, degree by degree, as the darkness rises from the east like water filling a basin. The air cools. The wind, which moved across the headlands during the day, grows gentler now, becoming little more than a breath against the skin. The rocks along this stretch of shore are smooth and dark, worn by centuries of waves into rounded forms. They glisten faintly where the last tide has left them wet. Between these rocks, in the natural hollows and depressions carved by time and water, lie the tidal pools, small worlds of stillness, holding seawater even as the greater ocean draws back. A figure moves along the rocks, unhurried and quiet. This is the watcher, the keeper of the night vigil. There is no urgency to this work, no danger to guard against. The watching is itself the purpose, a simple presence, a quiet attention given to this place and this slow turning of hours between dusk and dawn. The watcher's footsteps make almost no sound. The smooth stone beneath their feet is cool and damp. They move with the ease of long familiarity, knowing where each step will land, which surfaces are steady, and which might shift slightly. The body moves without thinking, leaving the mind free to settle into the rhythm of this place. Above, the first stars have begun to appear. They emerge one by one, pinpricks of light against the deepening blue. The sky is not yet fully dark. It holds that particular quality of twilight where day and night exist together for a brief time, neither one quite departed, neither one fully arrived. The watcher pauses, looking upward, watching as the stars slowly multiply across the dome of sky. The ocean lies to the west, its surface still visible as a lighter gray against the darker land. Small waves roll toward the shore in steady succession, breaking softly against the rocks with a sound like breathing. A long inhale as each wave draws back, a gentle exhale as the next one arrives. The rhythm is constant, unchanging, a heartbeat that has continued for longer than any human memory. The watcher turns their attention to the nearest tidal pool. It rests in a shallow depression, perhaps 3 feet across, its surface perfectly still. The water is so clear that the bottom is visible even in the fading light. Pebbles of various colors, fragments of shell, the dark shape of a small anemone attached to the rock. The pool holds a measure of seawater, kept here when the tide withdrew. Now it waits, patient and complete, a small mirror reflecting the sky. The watcher kneels beside the pool, moving slowly, lowering themselves to the rock. The stone is hard but smooth beneath their knees. They rest their hands on their thighs and look down into the water, watching, breathing quietly, allowing their presence to settle like sediment drifting to the bottom of a still pond. The water in the pool is cool but not cold. The day's warmth still lingers in the shallow basin, held by the stone. A few strands of kelp rest against one side of the pool, their forms graceful and still. Nothing moves. The surface of the water is like glass, perfect and unbroken. Minutes pass. The watcher remains still watching. There is no need to speak, no need to move. The watching itself is enough. The mind, which may have been active with thoughts and concerns, begins to quiet. The body, which may have held tension, begins to soften. The act of observing something so simple and so still creates a kind of rest that moves inward, settling into the bones and breath. The sky continues to darken. The stars grow brighter as the last traces of day fade away. The Milky Way becomes visible, a river of light stretching across the heavens. The watcher looks up again, taking in this vastness, then returns their gaze to the small pool at their feet. The contrast is striking. The immensity of the universe above, the tiny, contained world below. Both are beautiful. Both are complete. A breath of wind moves across the rocks, cool against the watcher's face. It carries the scent of the ocean, salt and kelp and something deeper, something ancient and nameless. The watcher breathes in slowly, filling their lungs with this air, then releases the breath just as slowly. The body rises and falls with each breath, matching the rhythm of the waves. After a time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, longer, the watcher rises slowly to their feet. Their knees are slightly stiff from kneeling on the hard stone, but the stiffness fades as they stand and stretch gently. They look down at the pool once more, noting how the first moonlight has begun to touch its surface, then turn and walk slowly toward the next pool, several yards away. The moon is rising now, climbing above the eastern horizon. It is nearly full, a pale disk of light that seems almost weightless as it lifts into the sky. Its light is soft and silver, transforming the darkness into something gentler, something that seems to hold illumination within itself rather than simply being an absence of light. The second pool is larger than the first, perhaps 5 feet across and deeper, with sides that slope gently down to a central hollow. The watcher approaches it slowly, their shadow falling across the water for a moment before they move around to the other side, positioning themselves so the moonlight can reach the pool unobstructed. This pool is more active than the first. A small crab moves along the bottom, its movements careful and deliberate. The watcher can see its legs articulating slowly, carrying it from one side of the pool toward a cluster of mussels attached to the rock. The crab's shell is dark, almost black in this light, but the moonlight catches on its surface, creating tiny highlights that move as the creature moves. The watcher settles into a sitting position on the rock, legs crossed, hands resting loosely on their knees. They watch the crab's slow journey. There is no destination apparent, no purpose that reveals itself. The crab simply moves, existing in this moment, in this pool, under this sky. The watcher observes without judgment, without expectation, allowing the simple fact of the crab's existence to be enough. The waves continue their steady rhythm against the shore. The sound is constant, a white noise that fills the air without dominating it. Beneath that sound, if the watcher listens very carefully, there are smaller sounds, the faint trickle of water draining from the rocks, the tiny click of a periwinkle snail adjusting its position on stone, the almost inaudible whisper of wind moving through the dry seaweed that clings to the upper rocks. Time moves differently here. The markers that usually divide one moment from the next seem to dissolve. There is no clock, no schedule, no appointment to keep. There is only the slow turning of the earth, the gradual movement of the moon across the sky, the patient rhythm of tide and wave. The watcher feels this dissolution of ordinary time, feels themselves settling into a deeper rhythm, one that has existed long before they arrived and will continue long after they depart. The crab reaches the mussels and pauses there, its claws moving slightly as if investigating. Then, finding nothing of interest, it turns and begins moving back the way it came. The watcher smiles faintly, a small expression that comes and goes like a ripple on water. There is something peaceful about watching a creature go about its simple business, unburdened by the complexities that fill human minds. The moon climbs higher. Its light grows stronger, casting distinct shadows now among the rocks. The tide pool becomes a mirror of silver light, the water's surface reflecting the moon's glow with perfect clarity. The watcher can see both the moon above and its reflection below, two circles of light separated by the fact of their own body sitting between them. A small fish darts suddenly across the pool, a flash of movement that breaks the stillness for just a moment. It disappears beneath an overhanging lip of rock, hiding in the shadow there. The watcher's eyes follow the movement, but their body remains still. Already the pool is settling back into its calm, the ripples from the fish's passage smoothing out, fading, disappearing until once again the surface is still. The night deepens around them. The watching continues, patient and gentle, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply present with what is. The watcher rises after a time, their movements slow and fluid, taking care not to disturb the stillness too abruptly. Their legs have grown accustomed to the position, and standing brings a pleasant stretch through muscles and joints. They pause for a moment, swaying slightly, feeling the solidity of the rock beneath their feet, the coolness of the night air against their skin. The coastline stretches in both directions, curving gently away into darkness. To the north, a cluster of larger rocks rises from the shore, their forms dark and massive against the star-filled sky. To the south, the rocks gradually diminish in size, becoming a scattered field of smaller stones that eventually gives way to a strip of sandy beach, barely visible in the moonlight. The watcher turns northward, moving slowly along the rocks toward the next cluster of pools. Each step is placed with care, though the familiarity of this path makes the movement almost automatic. The body knows this terrain, has walked it countless times, and moves with a quiet confidence that requires no conscious thought. The sound of the waves changes slightly as the watcher moves closer to the water's edge. Here, where the rocks jet out into the sea, the waves break against stone rather than flowing over it. Each wave arrives with a soft rush, a sound like a long breath being released, followed by the hissing whisper of foam sliding back down the wet rock. The pattern repeats endlessly, rush and hiss, a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Between the larger rocks, the watcher finds another pool, this one deeper than the others. The water here is dark, the bottom lost in shadow despite the moonlight. The sides of the pool are steep, the rock walls descending straight down into the water. The watcher cannot see what lives in these depths, but they know the pool is inhabited. Life finds its way into every space the ocean touches, no matter how small or deep. The watcher kneels beside this dark pool, leaning forward slightly to look down into the water. The surface is so still that it reflects the moon perfectly, a round disk of silver light floating in darkness. Around the edges, where the rock wall meets the water, there are traces of color, the deep red of coralline algae, the bright green of sea lettuce, the pale cream of barnacle shells. These colors are muted in the moonlight, transformed into shades of gray and silver, but their presence adds texture to the pool's edges. A ripple disturbs the surface, originating from somewhere deep within the pool. The moon's reflection breaks into fragments, dancing pieces of light that scatter and reform. The watcher watches this transformation patiently, waiting to see if whatever caused the ripple will reveal itself. But nothing appears. The surface gradually smooths, the fragments of moonlight coalesce back into a single reflection, and the mystery of what moved in the depths remains hidden. This is often the way of things here. Much of what happens in these pools occurs beyond sight, in the darkness beneath the surface or hidden in crevices within the rock. The watcher has learned to be content with partial knowledge, with glimpses and suggestions rather than complete understanding. There is a kind of peace in accepting that some things will remain unknown, that mystery is not a problem to be solved, but simply a quality of the world. The wind has died almost completely now. The air is so still that the watcher can hear the sound of their own breathing, a soft counterpoint to the waves. In and out, steady and slow, the breath moves through lungs and throat, as natural and unconsidered as the tide itself. The watcher pays attention to this breathing for a moment, feeling the coolness of the air entering their nostrils, the slight warmth of the exhaled breath against their upper lip. Minutes pass in silence. The watcher remains beside the dark pool, simply being present with it, asking nothing from this moment except the moment itself. Thoughts arise in the mind occasionally, fragments of the day just past, concerns about tomorrow, memories of other nights, but they drift away again like clouds moving across the moon. The watcher observes them without attachment, letting them come and go, returning attention always to the pool, the moonlight, the sound of waves. Eventually, the watcher stands again and continues moving northward along the rocks. The terrain becomes slightly more irregular here, requiring more attention to where each foot is placed. The rocks are larger, with greater spaces between them, and in these spaces the ocean has carved deeper channels. Water moves through these channels with each wave, flowing in and then draining back, creating small currents and eddies. The watcher steps carefully across a gap between two rocks, feeling the spray from a wave that breaks below. The mist touches their face, cool and damp, carrying the strong scent of salt. They pause on the other side, wiping the moisture from their cheek with one hand, then continue onward. Another pool comes into view, this one shallow and wide, stretching across the top of a broad, flat rock. The water here is only a few inches deep, spread in a thin layer across the stone. The moonlight penetrates all the way to the bottom, illuminating every detail, the texture of the rock beneath, the scattered grains of sand, the tiny fragments of shell. This pool is home to several sea stars, their five-pointed forms visible against the light-colored stone. They are perfectly still, as sea stars tend to be, their movement so slow as to be imperceptible to the human eye. The watcher counts them, 5 in total, distributed across the pool in no particular pattern. One is quite small, perhaps only an inch across. Another is much larger, its arms spanning nearly 6 inches. The colors vary from deep purple to pale orange, though in the moonlight these hues are transformed into subtle shades of gray. The watcher does not kneel beside this pool but remains standing, looking down into it from above. From this angle, the water's thinness makes it almost invisible. The sea stars appear to be resting directly on stone, as if the water were not there at all. Only the slight shimmer of the surface, catching the moonlight, reveals the presence of the liquid medium that sustains them. A wave breaks nearby, larger than the others, and its surge sends a fresh flow of water into the pool. The level rises slightly, perhaps half an inch, and the incoming water disturbs the stillness, creating ripples that spread outward from the pool's edge toward its center. The sea stars remain motionless as the water moves around them. When the wave retreats, the pool drains slightly, returning almost to its previous level. The ripples fade. The surface settles back into calm. The watcher observes this cycle: the wave, the influx of water, the rise and fall, the return to stillness. It happens again with the next wave, and again with the one after that. Each repetition is slightly different in its details, but identical in its pattern. This is the pulse of the tidal pool's existence, the rhythm that sustains it, the connection between the small, contained world of the pool and the vast, boundless ocean beyond. Time continues its slow movement. The moon climbs higher into the sky, following its ancient path from east to west. Its light grows brighter as it rises, no longer filtered through the atmospheric haze near the horizon. The pools become islands of silver light scattered across the dark rocks, each one a small beacon in the night. The watcher turns and looks back the way they came, seeing the line of pools they have already visited stretching away into the distance. Each one is visible as a point of reflected moonlight, a constellation mapped onto the earth rather than the sky. The sight brings a feeling of quiet satisfaction, not pride or accomplishment, but simply a gentle pleasure in the fact of this watching, this presence, this patient attention given to the slow beauty of the night. Ahead, more pools wait to be visited. The watcher turns northward again and continues walking, their pace unhurried, their breathing steady and calm. The night holds many hours yet, and there is no need to rush. The pools will be there, the moonlight will continue to fall, the waves will maintain their rhythm. Everything that needs to happen is already happening, perfectly and completely, requiring nothing but awareness to witness it. The rock beneath the watcher's feet is solid and ancient, worn smooth by countless tides. With each step, they feel that solidity, that permanence, and it becomes a kind of reassurance. The world may be full of change and uncertainty, but here on this shore, the rocks remain, the tide flows in and out, the moon rises and sets, and the pools hold their quiet vigil between the elements of stone and water. The watcher moves slowly among the rocks, following the natural contours of the shore. There is no set path, no defined route that must be followed. The watching is guided by intuition and gentle impulse. A pool catches the eye, invites attention, and the watcher responds by moving toward it. Another pool might be passed by, left for later, or perhaps not visited at all this night. There is no requirement to see everything, to catalog each pool. The watching is not about completion or thoroughness. It is simply about being present with whatever presents itself. A pool comes into view nestled between two large boulders. The boulders lean toward each other, creating a sheltered space where the pool rests in shadow, protected from the direct moonlight. The watcher approaches and stands at the edge of this shadowed place, looking down into the darkness. The water is barely visible here, its surface a subtle gleam that hints at its presence more than reveals it. The watcher's eyes adjust slowly to the dimness. Details begin to emerge from what first appeared to be uniform darkness. The sides of the boulders, where they descend into the water, are covered with a dense growth of mussels. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, clustered together in a living carpet of blue-black shells. The moonlight, reaching indirectly into this space, creates faint highlights along the edges of the shells, defining their forms without fully illuminating them. This pool sounds different from the others. The waves, breaking against the outer rocks, send surges of water into the confined space between the boulders. The water moves with a gentle sloshing sound, a liquid whisper that echoes slightly in the enclosed area. The sound rises and falls with each wave, creating a rhythm within a rhythm, the larger pattern of the waves themselves, and the smaller pattern of the water's movement within this particular pool. The watcher sits down on one of the boulders, positioning themselves where they can look down into the shadowed pool while remaining comfortable. The stone is cool through their clothing, its surface slightly rough with patches of dried salt and the remnant texture of barnacles. They settle their weight, finding a stable position, and then become still, giving themselves over to the watching. In the darkness of the pool, small movements begin to reveal themselves. A cluster of mussels shifts slightly as water flows around them. A tiny shrimp-like creature darts from one shadow to another, visible for only a fraction of a second as it crosses a patch of faint light. Something larger moves along the bottom, possibly a crab, possibly a sea urchin, its form too indistinct in the dimness to identify with certainty. The watcher does not strain to see more clearly. The mystery is acceptable, even pleasant. There is something restful about sitting in this shadowed place, letting the eyes soften, allowing the limited vision to be enough. Not every detail needs to be known. Not every creature needs to be identified and named. The watching can be a kind of negative space, an openness that holds whatever appears without grasping at it. The sound of the water continues its gentle rhythm. Slosh and settle, slosh and settle. The watcher's breathing synchronizes with this rhythm without conscious effort, becoming part of the pattern. Breath in as the water rises, breath out as it settles. The boundary between watcher and watched grows less distinct. The separation between the person sitting on the rock and the pool below becomes more conceptual than actual. Both are part of the same night, the same shore, the same slow turning of hours toward dawn. A feeling of deep calm settles over the watcher, a quietness that goes beyond the absence of sound or movement. It is a quality of being, a state where the usual activity of the mind, its constant commentary and analysis, its planning and remembering, subsides into a gentle stillness. Thoughts still arise, but they are fewer, softer, less insistent. They drift through consciousness like small fish moving through dark water, present but not demanding attention. Time passes. How much time? The watcher does not know and does not wonder. The moon continues its arc across the sky, its position shifting gradually, changing the angle of light that reaches into the shadowed pool. What was completely dark before now receives a thin sliver of illumination. The watcher notices this change without commenting on it, simply observing how the moonlight creeps slowly across the water's surface, revealing incrementally what was hidden. Eventually, the watcher rises from the boulder, moving slowly, allowing their body to unfold from its seated position. There is a pleasant stiffness in the joints, the kind that comes from sitting still in cool air, and the movement of standing brings warmth back into the limbs. The watcher stretches slightly, reaching arms overhead, feeling the pull along their spine, then lowering their arms and rolling their shoulders gently. They take one last look at the shadowed pool, acknowledging it silently, then turn and continue along the rocks. The terrain here begins to level out somewhat, the large boulders giving way to a broader expanse of smooth, flat stone. This area is like a plaza, a natural platform worn flat by the endless action of waves over centuries. Several pools dot this flat expanse, each one a perfect circle or oval carved into the stone. They are like footprints left by some giant hand, depressions worn into the rock and filled with seawater. The watcher moves from one to another, pausing at each, looking down into the clear water. These pools are shallow, most no deeper than the length of a hand. The water is crystal clear, and every detail of the bottom is visible. The subtle color variations in the stone, the small colonies of barnacles, the delicate fronds of seaweed that sway gently with each influx of water from the waves. The moonlight illuminates these pools completely, transforming them into luminous circles on the dark stone. At one pool, the watcher notices a particularly beautiful arrangement of stones at the bottom. The retreating tide has left a pattern, a central stone of pale quartz, surrounded by a ring of smaller pebbles in various shades of gray and brown. The arrangement looks almost intentional, as if someone had carefully placed each stone, but the watcher knows it is merely the work of water and chance, a momentary order arising from chaos, beautiful precisely because it is temporary and unplanned. The watcher kneels beside this pool, studying the pattern. The quartz stone catches the moonlight and seems to glow from within, a small moon in miniature, reflecting the larger moon above. The surrounding pebbles create a dark frame that makes the central stone's brightness more pronounced. It is a tiny mandala, a meditation in stone and water, lasting only as long as the tide remains low. A wave larger than the others sends water washing across the flat stone, and some of it flows into the pool. The influx disturbs the pattern slightly, shifting one of the smaller pebbles. The watcher watches this change happen, observing without attachment. The pattern was beautiful, and now it is slightly different, and it is still beautiful. Nothing is lost. Everything changes. This is the nature of things. The watcher remains kneeling for a time, hands resting on thighs, breathing quietly. The body is relaxed now, fully settled into the rhythm of the night. Any residual tension from the day has dissolved completely, released into the cool air and the steady sound of waves. The muscles are soft, the joints loose, the breath moving easily and naturally through the lungs. Another wave washes across the stone, and another. Each one brings a thin sheet of water sliding across the flat surface, filling the shallow pools, then draining away again. The watcher watches this cycle repeat, mesmerized by its simplicity and constancy. There is nothing to do but watch, nothing to think about or plan for. The waves will continue, the pools will fill and drain, the moon will move across the sky. All of this will happen whether the watcher is present or not, and yet the watching gives it meaning, or perhaps receives meaning from it. The distinction is unclear, and the watcher does not try to clarify it. Standing again, the watcher moves to the edge of the flat stone, where it meets the water. Here, the waves break directly against the rock, sending up small sprays of foam. The watcher stands just beyond the reach of the spray, close enough to feel the mist on their face, far enough to remain mostly dry. The sensation is pleasant, the cool touch of salt water, the freshness of the moving air, the sense of standing at the boundary between land and sea. The ocean stretches away into darkness, its surface reflecting the moonlight in a broad, shimmering path that extends from the shore to the horizon. The waves roll in from that distant darkness, traveling across miles of open water to break here, on this particular shore, against these particular rocks. The watcher thinks about this journey, the way each wave begins somewhere far out at sea, moves across the water's surface, and finally ends here in foam and spray. It seems both insignificant and miraculous, ordinary and profound. The moon has climbed higher still. It is perhaps a third of the way across the sky now, no longer low on the eastern horizon, but elevated into the vault of the heavens. Its light is strong and clear, casting distinct shadows among the rocks. The watcher looks up at it, at its cratered surface visible even from this great distance, at the way it hangs suspended in space, held there by forces invisible but immutable. A feeling of smallness comes over the watcher, but it is not an uncomfortable feeling. It is, rather, a kind of relief, the recognition that the watcher is a small part of something much larger, that the concerns and worries that might fill their days are, in the scope of the universe, barely a whisper. The moon does not care about these concerns. The waves do not pause for worry. The pools simply exist, patient and complete, regardless of what any human mind might think or feel. The watcher carries this recognition gently, like carrying water cupped in the hands. It is not something to hold tightly or to force into words. It is simply a feeling, a momentary opening into a deeper understanding that will fade when morning comes, but that, for now, fills the space of the watching with a profound peace. The watcher turns away from the open water and moves back among the rocks, leaving the flat stone platform behind. The terrain rises slightly here, a gentle slope of layered stone that climbs perhaps 10 or 15 feet above the current waterline. At high tide, the ocean reaches nearly to the top of this slope, but now, with the tide still relatively low, a wide expanse of rock is exposed, dry except where spray has dampened it. The watcher climbs slowly, placing each foot with care on the slanted surface. The rock here is ridged and textured, formed of layers that were once horizontal sediments at the bottom of an ancient sea, now tilted and uplifted by geological forces, so slow they escape human perception. The layers create natural steps, each one only a few inches high, making the climb easy and almost meditative. Step, pause, breathe, step again. At the top of the rise, the watcher stops and turns to look back. From this elevation, the view encompasses a long stretch of the coastline. The pools they have visited are visible as scattered points of moonlight, each one a small jewel set into the dark stone. Beyond them, the ocean extends to the horizon, its surface textured with the pattern of waves, some patches catching the moonlight in gleaming silver, other areas lying in relative darkness. The air is slightly different at this height, moving more freely without the shelter of the rocks below. It carries the ocean scent more strongly, along with other scents that speak of the intertidal zone, the smell of kelp drying on stone, the faint mineral odor of exposed rock, the subtle tang of marine life living and dying in the endless cycle of the tides. The watcher breathes deeply, filling their lungs with this air, then releases it slowly. The breath becomes visible as a faint mist in the cool night air, a brief cloud that dissipates almost immediately. The watcher takes another breath, and another, watching each exhalation vanish into the darkness, a small reminder of the body's warmth, its living presence in the cool night. Behind the watcher, inland from the shore, the land rises into darkness. There are no lights visible, no houses, no roads, no signs of human habitation. This stretch of coast is remote, accessible only by a long walk over rough terrain, and that remoteness is part of what makes it special, what allows the watching to happen without interruption or distraction. Here, the night is complete, unbroken by artificial light, and the darkness is deep and genuine. The watcher turns back toward the ocean and begins descending the other side of the rise. The rock here is different, smoother, more uniform, with fewer layers and ridges. The descent requires attention, as the smooth surface offers less purchase for the feet, but the watcher moves confidently, their body remembering this path even in darkness. At the bottom of the slope, another pool waits. This one is larger than most, perhaps 8 feet across and roughly circular. The water is deeper here as well, at least 2 feet at the center, and the bottom is not visible despite the moonlight. The pool has a presence, a sense of weight and depth that the shallower pools lack. The watcher approaches the edge and sits down, legs extended, feet dangling just above the water's surface. They lean back on their hands, feeling the solid stone beneath their palms, and gaze out across the pool. The surface is remarkably still, barely rippling despite the breeze that moves across the rocks. The pool seems to exist in its own calm, its own silence, separate from the motion and sound of the waves nearby. Minutes pass in quiet observation. The watcher's mind has grown very still now, the constant stream of thoughts reduced to a trickle, then to isolated drops, then to something that is almost but not quite silence. There is still awareness, still perception, but it has become spacious and open, a vast sky in which occasional thoughts drift like clouds, present but not obscuring the clarity beneath them. A fish breaks the surface of the pool suddenly, leaping into the air for a fraction of a second before splashing back down. The sound is startling in the stillness, a sharp slap of water against water. Ripples spread outward in perfect circles from the point of entry, expanding until they reach the edges of the pool, then reflecting back toward the center, creating an intricate pattern of interference as the outward moving and inward moving ripples meet and cross. The watcher observes this pattern with fascination. The moonlight catches on the ripples, creating lines of brightness and shadow that move across the surface in complex geometries. The pattern is constantly changing, never repeating, yet somehow always the same in its essential nature. Circles within circles, waves within waves, motion within stillness. Gradually, the ripples diminish. The circles become fainter, the intersections less pronounced. The surface smooths, returning slowly to its previous calm. After a minute or two, the pool is still again, as if the fish had never leaped, as if the disturbance had never occurred. The water holds no memory of the event. It simply returns to its nature, which is stillness and clarity. The watcher wonders idly what caused the fish to leap. Was it pursuing prey? Fleeing from a predator within the pool? Or was it simply an expression of energy, a moment of exuberance that needed no reason or purpose? There is no way to know, and after a moment, the wondering fades. The fish leaped, and now it has not, and both states are simply what is. The breeze picks up slightly, and the watcher feels it against their face and arms. It is cool but not cold, brisk but not harsh. The sensation is pleasant, a gentle reminder of the body's boundaries, the place where skin meets air. The watcher closes their eyes for a moment, focusing on this sensation, on the way the breeze touches different parts of the body. The face first, then the neck, the arms, even the back of the hands. Each touch is distinct, each brings a small gift of sensation. Opening their eyes again, the watcher looks up at the sky. The stars are brilliant now, the moon not yet bright enough to wash them out. The watcher picks out a few familiar constellations. There is Cassiopeia, its W shape unmistakable. There is the Big Dipper, the 2 stars at the end of its cup pointing toward Polaris, the North Star, steady and unchanging. These patterns have been observed for thousands of years, given names and meanings by countless cultures, and yet the stars themselves are indifferent to human stories. They burn in their appointed places, following laws that long predate consciousness. The watcher's gaze moves from constellation to constellation, tracing the patterns without urgency. There is something deeply peaceful about looking at stars, about contemplating the vast distances involved, the immense age of the light reaching the eyes. That light began its journey years ago, decades ago, sometimes centuries ago, traveling through the emptiness of space to arrive here, now, at this particular moment, to be absorbed by the retinas of the watcher's eyes. It seems impossible, and yet it is utterly ordinary, happening every night for anyone who cares to look up. A shooting star streaks across the sky, a brief line of light that appears and vanishes in less than a second. The watcher feels a small lift in their chest, a wordless response to beauty that comes and goes too quickly to be captured in thought. The sky is empty again where the meteor passed, showing no trace of its trajectory, and yet something in the watcher has been touched, some capacity for wonder that persists even in this deep state of calm. The watcher returns their attention to the pool. The fish does not leap again. Nothing moves on the surface. The water is a dark mirror, reflecting the stars above, doubling the universe. The watcher looks down into this reflection, seeing Cassiopeia and the Big Dipper repeated in miniature, wavering slightly with the pool's imperceptible movement, and experiences a moment of disorientation, which is the real sky and which the reflection. Both are equally present, equally valid. The pool contains the universe just as surely as the universe contains the pool. Time continues its slow progression. The moon moves across the sky, its path steady and inevitable. The watcher sits by the pool, hands resting on stone, body relaxed, mind quiet. There is nothing to do, nowhere to go. The watching is its own purpose, its own completion. Each moment is sufficient unto itself, requiring nothing more than awareness to be whole. Eventually, after 10 minutes, after 20, the watcher does not count. They shift position slightly, drawing their feet back from their dangling position and tucking them beneath their body. The movement is slow and deliberate, preserving the stillness rather than breaking it. Settled into the new position, the watcher continues to observe the pool, the reflected stars, the occasional ripple caused by water draining from the rocks above. The ocean maintains its rhythm in the background, waves breaking and retreating, breaking and retreating. The sound has become so constant that it almost disappears, the way a steady tone can fade from awareness, but it is still there, still present, the underlying pulse of this place. The watcher listens to it without listening, hearing it without focusing on it, allowing it to be part of the texture of the night rather than an object of attention. A cloud drifts across the moon, dimming its light for a moment. The change is gradual, the light fading slowly as the cloud's thin edge crosses the moon's face, then decreasing more rapidly as the cloud's denser center blocks more of the light, then gradually brightening again as the cloud passes and the moon emerges on the other side. The pool darkens and lightens in response, its surface losing and then regaining its luminosity, the reflected stars fading and then returning. The watcher observes this change with the same equanimity they have brought to everything else this night. The dimming and brightening are neither good nor bad, neither desirable nor undesirable. They are simply what is happening, the natural result of clouds moving across the sky, and the watching accommodates them without resistance, without preference. The moon clears the cloud completely, and its full brightness returns. The pool becomes a circle of silver light once more, its depths mysterious despite the illumination. The watcher takes a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill their lungs, then releases it slowly. The body is very relaxed now, held upright more by balance than by muscular effort, swaying slightly with each breath like kelp moving in a gentle current. The watcher eventually rises from beside the deep pool, the movement slow and unhurried. Standing brings a gentle stretch through the spine, a pleasant lengthening after the time spent sitting. They pause for a moment, swaying slightly, feeling the blood flow adjusting to the change in position, then turn and begin walking again along the rocks. The coastline curves gently here, bending away from the open ocean and creating a more sheltered area. The waves are less forceful in this protected curve, their energy diminished by the angle at which they approach the shore. The sound changes too, becoming softer, less emphatic. Instead of the sharp crash and hiss of waves against exposed rock, there is a gentler lapping, a liquid murmur that speaks of calmer waters. The rocks in this sheltered area are different as well. Where the exposed coast bears the marks of constant wave action, smooth surfaces, rounded edges, deep channels carved by centuries of force, these protected rocks retain more texture, more detail. There are patches of rough stone, areas where barnacles and mussels grow in thick clusters, small ledges and overhangs that would be scoured away in a more exposed location. The watcher moves among these rocks with the same careful attention, feet finding purchase on the varied surfaces, hands occasionally touching stone for balance. The moonlight casts complex shadows here, the rocks' irregular shapes creating pockets of darkness interspersed with areas of bright illumination. It is like moving through a landscape of light and shadow, each step bringing a new configuration of brightness and dark. A pool appears ahead, tucked into a corner where 3 rocks meet. The watcher approaches and finds a pool of unusual shape, long and narrow, more like a channel than a circular basin. The water flows through this channel with each wave, creating a miniature stream that runs from one end to the other before draining back as the wave retreats. The watcher stands at one end of this channel pool, watching the water's movement. A wave arrives and water flows into the channel, filling it, moving with visible current from where the watcher stands toward the far end. Small particles suspended in the water become visible in this flow, fragments of seaweed, perhaps, or tiny organisms, or just particles of sand. They move downstream with the current, carried along by the water's motion. Then the wave retreats, and the flow reverses. The water drains back, returning to the ocean, and the particles that were moving in one direction now move in the other, carried back toward the watcher. The channel never empties completely. There is always some water remaining at the lowest point, but it rises and falls with each wave cycle, the water flowing back and forth in an endless oscillation. The watcher finds this movement mesmerizing. There is something deeply peaceful about watching water flow, about observing the simple fact of liquid moving from one place to another. The mind seems to follow the water's movement, becoming itself more fluid, less fixed in its patterns and habits. Thoughts arise and flow away like the particles in the channel, appearing and disappearing, leaving no trace. Minutes pass as the watcher observes this flowing. The body stands relaxed, weight balanced evenly on both feet, arms hanging loosely at the sides. The breathing has synchronized with the rhythm of the waves again, inhaling as water flows into the channel, exhaling as it drains back. This synchronization happens without conscious effort, the body naturally aligning itself with the rhythms it observes. A small fish appears in the channel, swimming against the current as water drains back toward the ocean. The watcher watches it struggle, for it is a struggle, the current clearly stronger than the fish's swimming ability. The fish makes slow progress, fins working rapidly, body flexing side to side, but it is barely holding its position, let alone advancing against the flow. Then the current reverses as another wave arrives, and suddenly the fish is carried rapidly upstream, swept along by the water's motion. It seems to relax into this easier travel, letting the current do the work, and in seconds it has traveled the entire length of the channel. When the flow reverses again, the fish resumes its struggle, swimming against the current, holding position but not advancing. The watcher realizes what they are observing. The fish is using the bidirectional flow to travel, swimming hard when the current opposes it merely to maintain position, then allowing the reverse current to carry it forward. It is a strategy for movement, an adaptation to the rhythmic environment of the channel. The watcher feels a quiet admiration for this small creature, its instinctive understanding of the water's patterns, its ability to work with the flow rather than only against it. After several more cycles, the fish reaches the far end of the channel and disappears into the rocks there, presumably entering a pool or crevice where the current is less strong. The watcher continues to observe the empty channel, watching the water flow back and forth, the pattern unchanged by the fish's absence. The moon has climbed higher still. The watcher looks up and sees that it has passed the midpoint of its arc across the sky. Hours have gone by since the watching began, though the passage of time has been almost imperceptible, marked only by the moon's gradual movement and the slow shift in the quality of the darkness. The night is fully settled now, as deep and complete as it will become before the first hints of dawn begin to soften the eastern sky. The watcher turns away from the channel pool and continues following the curve of the coastline. The sheltered area begins to open up again here, the rocks gradually transitioning back toward a more exposed orientation. The sound of the waves grows louder, the rhythm more insistent. The wind picks up as well, no longer blocked by the curve of land, and the watcher feels its cool touch more strongly. Another cluster of pools comes into view, several of them scattered across a relatively flat area of stone. These pools are varied in size and depth, some shallow enough to see the bottom clearly, others deeper and more opaque. The watcher moves among them, pausing at each one, looking down into the water, observing whatever presents itself. One pool contains a dense growth of seaweed, the fronds waving gently with the water's subtle motion. The seaweed is beautiful in the moonlight, each frond outlined in silver where the light catches it, the rest falling into shadow. The movement is hypnotic, slow, graceful, seemingly choreographed, though it is only the random motion of water and plant responding to invisible currents. The watcher kneels beside this pool, close enough to see the details of the seaweed's structure. The way each frond branches into smaller strands, the way those strands taper to fine points, the small holdfasts at the base where the plant attaches to rock. The seaweed forms a small forest, and in that forest, the watcher can imagine, whole communities of tiny creatures make their lives, amphipods and copepods and larval forms of larger animals, all finding shelter and sustenance among the waving fronds. A wave brings a surge of fresh water into the pool, and the seaweed responds, bending with the flow, all the fronds moving in unison as the current passes through them. Then the water settles, and the fronds slowly return to their previous positions, though not exactly. Each cycle of wave and settling leaves the forest in a slightly different configuration, an ever-changing pattern that never repeats exactly yet always maintains its essential character. The watcher remains beside this pool for a long time, watching the seaweeds dance, the mind completely absorbed in the simple observation. There is no thought of past or future, no awareness of anything beyond this moment, this pool, this gentle movement. The sense of self, the feeling of being a separate observer watching something external, grows thin and transparent. There is just the watching, just the moment, just the seaweed waving in moonlit water. Eventually, without any particular decision or intention, the watcher stands and moves on. The body knows when it is time to shift, when the watching at one pool is complete and another pool calls for attention. This knowledge comes from somewhere below the level of conscious thought, a wisdom of the body, or perhaps simply a natural response to subtle changes in the environment. The next pool is smaller, perhaps 2 feet across, perfectly circular. The water is very clear and the bottom is visible, clean stone with no growth, no seaweed, no visible animals. It is an empty pool, or seems to be, and yet the watcher finds it no less interesting than the others. There is beauty in emptiness, in the simple clarity of water resting in stone. The pool needs nothing added to be complete. It is what it is, and that is sufficient. The watcher looks down into this empty pool, seeing their own reflection on the surface, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky, barely distinguishable in the moonlight. The reflection wavers slightly with the water's imperceptible motion, a dark shape that could be anyone or no one, presence reduced to pure form. A breath of wind disturbs the surface, and the reflection fragments into ripples. The watcher becomes abstract, deconstructed into patterns of light and dark that bear no resemblance to a human form. Then the wind passes and the water smooths, and the reflection gradually reforms, assembling itself back into a recognizable shape. Head, shoulders, the suggestion of a body below. The watcher experiences this dissolution and reformation as a kind of metaphor, though for what they are not certain. Perhaps for the way identity itself is fluid, constantly dissolving and reforming, never as solid or permanent as it seems. Or perhaps for the way consciousness arises from and returns to something more fundamental, appearing and disappearing like reflections on water. Or perhaps it is not a metaphor for anything, just an interesting phenomenon observed in moonlight on a quiet night. The watcher moves on, leaving the empty pool behind. The walking continues, steady and unhurried, moving from pool to pool, from rock to rock, following no predetermined path, but simply going where the terrain and the impulse of the moment lead. The body is moving through space, yes, but the watching itself has become placeless, timeless, simply present with whatever is. The ocean continues its eternal rhythm beside them. The moon continues its slow arc across the heavens. The pools rest in their stone basins, each one a small world, complete and sufficient. And the watcher continues the vigil, present and attentive, asking nothing, expecting nothing, simply being there with what is, breath by breath, step by step, through the deep hours of the night. The coastline begins to change again as the watcher continues northward. The rocks here are older, more weathered, their surfaces pitted and textured by centuries of exposure to salt and wind and rain. Patches of lichen grow on the stone above the high tide line, pale gray and subtle green, so thin they seem almost painted on rather than growing from the rock. In the moonlight, these lichens are nearly invisible, detected more by the slight change in texture they create than by any difference in color. The watcher's pace has slowed even further, each step taking several seconds, the body moving almost as slowly as the tide itself. There is no hurry in this movement, no destination waiting to be reached. The walking has become another form of stillness, a meditation in motion, each footfall placed with the same careful attention that might be given to a breath or a heartbeat. A pool appears, set higher than most, near the upper limit of where the highest tides reach. This pool receives water only during the spring tides, those exceptional high waters that occur when sun and moon align their gravitational pull. Between those events, the pool exists in relative isolation, its water evaporating slowly under the sun, becoming more saline, more concentrated, creating conditions that only the hardiest creatures can survive. The watcher approaches this high pool and kneels beside it. The water level is low, perhaps 6 inches down from the pool's rim, evidence of evaporation since the last high tide. The surface is perfectly still, undisturbed by waves even when they surge highest, and in that stillness the water is remarkably clear despite its increased salinity. At the bottom of the pool, a sea anemone rests, its tentacles extended. The creature is small, perhaps 2 inches across, its body a pale column topped by a crown of delicate tentacles that wave very slowly in the still water. Each tentacle is lined with thousands of stinging cells, weapons for capturing the tiny prey that drift past. But in the moonlight the tentacles appear purely decorative, like the petals of a flower arranged around a central mouth. The watcher observes this small hunter, this simple animal that has survived in this harsh environment. Too salty, too warm during the day, too isolated from the regular influx of fresh seawater that sustains the lower pools. The anemone's presence speaks of adaptation, of life's stubborn persistence even in difficult circumstances, but the watcher does not think these thoughts explicitly. They simply observe, appreciating the creature's existence without needing to draw lessons from it. One of the tentacles twitches slightly, responding to some stimulus invisible to the watcher, perhaps a chemical trace in the water, perhaps a vibration, perhaps nothing more than the animal's own internal processes. The movement is small and slow, barely perceptible, but in the stillness of the night it seems significant, a reminder that even in apparent stillness there is life, movement, process. The watcher remains beside the high pool for several minutes, watching the anemone's subtle movements, observing the way the moonlight penetrates the clear water and illuminates the pale stone beneath. The pool is a harsh environment, yes, but it is also beautiful, possessed of the stark beauty that comes from simplicity and survival. Nothing is here that does not need to be here. Every element serves a purpose, exists for a reason, or perhaps for no reason at all beyond the fact of its existence. Standing again, the watcher feels a slight tremor in their legs, a faint weakness that comes from the long hours of walking and standing and kneeling on the hard rocks. It is not an unpleasant sensation. The body is tired, yes, but it is a good tiredness, the kind that comes from gentle exertion rather than strain. The watcher stretches slightly, rolling their shoulders, bending their knees a few times to restore circulation, then continues onward. The rocks descend again here, leading back toward the water's edge. The watcher follows this descent, feet finding the familiar holds and ledges, body balanced and controlled even in the darkness. At the bottom, a large flat rock extends out into the water, forming a natural platform where the waves break and flow across the stone's surface. The watcher walks out onto this platform, moving toward its edge where the rock meets the open ocean. The waves are larger here, less broken by intervening rocks, and each one sends a sheet of water sliding across the platform's surface. The watcher stops several feet from the edge, where the water reaches but does not yet have force enough to unbalance anyone standing there. A wave arrives and water flows across the stone, surrounding the watcher's feet in a thin sheet of foam and seawater. The sensation is sharp, the coldness of the water, the slight pressure against the ankles, the pull of the retreating water trying to draw them toward the edge. The watcher stands firm, rooted to the stone, feeling the water flow around them like a stream flowing around a standing stone. The wave retreats and the platform drains, the water running back toward the ocean in sheets and rivulets, finding every slight depression in the stone, following gravity's insistent pull. For a moment the rock is merely damp, covered with a thin film of water that reflects the moonlight in a broad, shimmering surface. Then the next wave arrives and the cycle repeats, the surge, the flow across stone, the retreat. The watcher stands in this zone of rhythmic inundation, feeling each wave wash around their feet, each retreat leave them standing on damp stone. The cold of the water is bracing, sharpening the senses, bringing full attention to the body and this moment. Thoughts have faded almost completely now, leaving only sensation, the cold, the wetness, the slight pull of the retreating water, the sound of the waves, the cool air against the face. Several minutes pass in this standing meditation, the body motionless while water flows around it, the mind empty and clear like the surface of a still pool. Then, without deliberate decision, the watcher turns and walks back across the platform toward the higher rocks, leaving the edge and its rhythmic washing behind. Another pool waits inland from the platform, this one deeper than most and roughly rectangular. The watcher approaches and sits on the edge, dangling their feet into the water. The coolness of the water envelopes their feet and ankles, soothing muscles that have been working steadily for hours. The watcher sits very still, feeling the water's gentle support, its coolness penetrating skin and reaching toward bone. Small fish become visible in the pool, drawn perhaps by the shadow the watcher's body casts on the water's surface, or perhaps simply following their own nocturnal patterns. They move in a loose school, perhaps a dozen of them, each one 2 or 3 inches long, their bodies silver in the moonlight. The fish swim in coordinated patterns, turning together, moving as a single entity that flows around the obstacles in the pool. The watcher watches this school with fascination. How do the fish coordinate their movements so precisely? How does each one know when to turn, when to accelerate, when to slow? There must be signals passing between them, visual cues, perhaps, or something sensed through the lateral line that runs along each fish's body, that organ which detects pressure waves and movements in the water. But from outside, from the watcher's perspective, the school seems to move as if guided by a single consciousness, a collective intelligence that transcends the individual fish. The school approaches the watcher's feet, the fish swimming closer, apparently unafraid, or at least unconcerned by this large presence in their pool. They swim around the feet and ankles, their small bodies creating tiny currents in the water, their movements tickling slightly against the skin. The watcher remains perfectly still, not wanting to disturb them, and the fish continue their swimming, apparently accepting the watcher's feet as merely another feature of their environment. This close, the watcher can see details of the fish, the large eyes, adapted for seeing in low light, the delicate fins that adjust constantly to maintain position and direction, the slight opening and closing of mouths as they filter water across their gills. Each fish is a small miracle of adaptation, a solution to the problem of living in water, of extracting oxygen from a liquid medium, of navigating in 3 dimensions, of finding food and avoiding predators. The school moves away again, swimming toward the deeper end of the pool, and the watcher's feet are alone in the water once more. The sensation remains pleasant, the coolness, the gentle support, the slight movement of water around motionless limbs. The watcher closes their eyes for a moment, focusing entirely on the sensation, on the boundary between skin and water, between body and environment. When their eyes open again, the watcher notices that the moon has moved considerably across the sky. It is past its zenith now, beginning the slow descent toward the western horizon. The angle of light has changed, casting shadows in different directions, transforming the familiar landscape of rocks and pools into something slightly different, slightly new. The same place, viewed from the same position, yet altered by the simple fact of the moon's movement across the sky. The watcher lifts their feet from the pool, water streaming from them, drops falling back to the surface and creating small ripples that spread outward. They sit for a moment longer, letting their feet drip, feeling the air begin to dry the wet skin. Then they stand, moving slowly, and continue walking among the rocks. The pools continue, one after another, each one unique in its details yet fundamentally similar in its essence. Water held in stone, illuminated by moonlight, existing in the space between ocean and land, between high tide and low tide, between the fluidity of water and the solidity of earth. The watcher visits them without counting, without keeping track, without any sense of completion or incompletion. Each pool receives attention for as long as attention is given, then is left behind as the watching moves onward. The night deepens around them, or perhaps it is more accurate to say the night maintains its depth, for the darkness has been complete for hours now, and will remain so for hours yet. The watcher exists in this darkness as naturally as fish exist in water, moving through it without resistance, seeing by moonlight what needs to be seen, accepting what cannot be seen as equally valid, equally present. In one such clearing, surrounded by boulders on all sides, a pool waits. This pool is larger than most, perhaps 15 feet across, its shape irregular, following the contours of the space between the boulders. The water is deep. The watcher cannot see the bottom, even where the moonlight strikes the surface directly. The pool has the quality of a hidden place, a secret kept by the rocks, discovered only by those who venture into the boulder field's maze of passages. The watcher finds a boulder with a relatively flat top and climbs onto it, settling into a sitting position overlooking the pool. From this vantage point, the pool's full extent is visible, its irregular shoreline traced in moonlight where water meets stone. The surface is remarkably still, protected from wind and wave action by the surrounding boulders. It is like looking down into a perfectly calm lake, a mirror of dark water reflecting the sky above. The reflection is nearly perfect. The watcher can see stars on the water's surface, each point of light duplicated in the dark mirror below. The moon appears twice, once in the sky and once in the pool, and between them the watcher sits, equidistant from both, suspended between the heavens and their reflection. It is a vertiginous sensation, as if up and down have lost their meaning, as if the watcher might fall in either direction, up into the sky or down into the reflected sky below. The watcher allows this sensation to unfold without resistance, experiencing the dissolution of ordinary spatial orientation without alarm. The body knows which way is down, gravity provides that information constantly, but the mind can entertain other possibilities, can play with perception, can experience the world in ways that transcend the merely literal. This is part of the gift of the night watch, this freedom to perceive differently, to see not just what is there but what might be there, what the imagination can discover in the interplay of light and shadow and reflection. A small sound disturbs the silence, a splash, very soft, at the far end of the pool. The watcher's attention shifts to the source of the sound, but nothing is visible in the darkness there. Perhaps a fish broke the surface. Perhaps a bit of rock crumbled and fell into the water. Perhaps something else, something unidentifiable. The ripples from the splash spread outward, disturbing the reflection, breaking the stars into fragments of light that dance and shimmer on the moving surface. The watcher watches these ripples spread, watching the way they interact with each other as they bounce off the pool's irregular edges and return toward the center. The pattern becomes complex, overlapping circles creating interference patterns, peaks and troughs in the water's surface that catch light differently, creating a constantly changing mosaic of brightness and shadow. Gradually, the ripples diminish. The peaks flatten, the troughs rise, the surface smooths. The reflection reassembles itself, stars coalescing back into points of light, the moon reforming its circular shape. After a minute or two, the pool is still again, as if the splash had never occurred. Only the watcher's memory holds any evidence that the stillness was disturbed, and even that memory is already fading, becoming less distinct, less important. The watcher continues to sit on the boulder, looking down into the pool, watching the perfect reflection. Minutes pass. 5, 10, perhaps 15. Time has become very elastic, stretching and contracting, seeming to move quickly when the watcher is active and slowly when stillness settles in. But the actual passage of time is constant, marked by the moon's steady progress across the sky, by the waves that continue their rhythm beyond the boulder field, by the slow turning of the earth beneath. The coolness of the night is more pronounced now. The watcher feels it through their clothing, feels it in the exposed skin of face and hands. The boulder beneath them has surrendered all the warmth it absorbed during the day, and now it is cool, almost cold, drawing heat from the watcher's body. The watcher accepts this coolness, breathing it in, allowing it to penetrate, to settle into muscles and joints. The coldness is clarifying, sharpening the senses, keeping the body alert even as tiredness accumulates. Finally, the watcher climbs down from the boulder, lowering themselves carefully to the ground. The standing brings a wave of dizziness, from sitting still too long, from the depth of relaxation that has been achieved, from the accumulated tiredness of the night. The watcher steadies themselves with one hand against the boulder, waiting for the dizziness to pass, then begins making their way back through the passages between the rocks, retracing the route that brought them to this hidden pool. The watcher moves into an area where the rocks form a series of natural terraces, each level descending toward the water in broad, shallow steps. Pools occupy many of these terraces, creating a cascading sequence of basins connected by thin channels where water flows from one level to the next with each wave cycle. The arrangement is like a natural fountain, the water moving downward through the system in stages, pausing in each pool before continuing its descent. The watcher climbs to the highest terrace and sits at the edge of the uppermost pool, watching the water flow down through the system. A wave arrives, larger than average, and sends water surging up through the channels, filling the lowest pools first, then the middle pools, and finally reaching the highest pool where the watcher sits. The water rises, the level increasing by several inches, and then the wave retreats and the process reverses, water draining from the highest pool into the one below, which overflows into the next, creating a small waterfall, a cascade that continues down through all the levels until the water returns to the ocean. The sound of this cascading water is beautiful, a musical tinkling and splashing that rises and falls with each wave. The watcher listens to this music, hearing in it something like a natural composition, rhythms and patterns that change slightly with each iteration, yet maintain a consistent structure. High notes where water falls from one level to the next, deeper tones where larger volumes flow through wider channels, the underlying bass of the ocean waves providing the fundamental rhythm. The watcher's breathing synchronizes again with this rhythm, becoming part of the pattern. Breath in as the water rises, filling the pools. Breath out as the water cascades back down. The distinction between listener and listened to grows thin. The watcher becomes part of the system they observe, their body and mind resonating with the movement of water through stone. Several wave cycles pass, each one bringing its rise and fall, its filling and draining, its small cascade of water returning to the sea. The watcher observes each cycle as if it were the first, finding freshness in the repetition, discovering subtle variations that make each iteration unique. One wave brings more water, creating a stronger cascade. Another wave is weaker, barely reaching the highest pools. A third wave sends a piece of kelp up through the system, the dark strand tumbling through the channels like a living thing before lodging in one of the middle pools. The moon shines down on this terraced landscape, illuminating each pool, catching the falling water and transforming it into silver threads. The whole system glows with reflected light, a sculpture of stone and water brought to life by moonlight and wave action. The watcher sits within this beauty, part of it, observing it, held by it, and holding it in turn through the simple act of attention. A crab appears in the uppermost pool, emerging from a crevice in the rock. It moves sideways across the bottom, its legs working in that peculiar articulated motion characteristic of crustaceans, each joint bending in sequence, creating a ripple of movement along each limb. The crab is small, perhaps 3 inches across the shell, and dark in color, almost black except where the moonlight catches the edges and reveals hints of deep red. The watcher watches the crab's journey across the pool. It seems to have a destination, moving with purpose toward the far side where a cluster of mussels attaches to the stone. Reaching the mussels, the crab pauses, its claws moving to investigate the shells, testing them, perhaps looking for one that might be weakened or partially open. The mussels remain closed, unresponsive, sealed within their blue-black shells. Finding no opportunity among the mussels, the crab turns and begins moving back across the pool. A wave arrives and water surges into the basin, lifting the crab slightly, pushing it sideways. The crab allows itself to be moved, not fighting the current, simply holding position until the surge passes. When the water settles, the crab continues its journey, reaching the other side and disappearing back into the crevice from which it emerged. The watcher smiles faintly at this small drama, the crab's emergence, its investigation of the mussels, its return to shelter. The whole sequence took perhaps 2 minutes, a brief interruption in the endless cycle of waves and tides, and yet it felt complete, a small story with a beginning, middle, and end. The pool is empty again now, holding only water and stone and the silent mussels, but the watcher's attention remains, appreciating the emptiness as much as they appreciated the crab's presence. Time continues its movement, imperceptible in any single moment, but evident over longer spans. The moon has descended noticeably from its highest point, no longer directly overhead, but angling toward the west. Its light strikes the rocks at a different angle now, creating new patterns of illumination and shadow. Pools that were bright before now lie partly in shadow. Others, previously dark, now catch the direct moonlight and glow with renewed brilliance. The watcher rises from beside the terraced pools, standing slowly, letting the body adjust to the change in position. There is a deeper tiredness now, a weariness that has accumulated over the hours of walking and watching and kneeling on hard stone. But it is a pleasant tiredness, a fullness rather than a depletion. The body is ready for rest, yes, but there are hours yet before dawn, and the watching continues. The watcher descends the terraces carefully, moving from level to level, hand touching stone for balance where the steps are high or the surface slippery. At the bottom, they pause and look back up at the cascading system of pools, seeing it from this new perspective. The whole arrangement is visible from here. The highest pool at the top, the descending sequence of basins, the channels connecting them, the way the moonlight illuminates the entire structure. It is beautiful, and the watcher carries this beauty with them as they turn and walk onward along the shore. The rocks here are massive, great boulders that have broken away from the cliffs behind and tumbled down to rest at the water's edge. These boulders create a landscape of deep shadows and narrow passages, caves and arches where the ocean has worn through softer stone, leaving the harder rock standing. The watcher moves through this boulder field carefully, following passages between the rocks, ducking under low overhangs, emerging into small clearings where moonlight falls unobstructed. Emerging from the boulder field, the watcher returns to the more open expanse of the shore. The change is gradual, the massive boulders giving way to smaller rocks, the narrow passages opening into broader spaces where moonlight falls more freely. The sense of enclosure that characterized the boulder field releases, replaced by the openness of the coast stretching away in both directions. The watcher pauses here, at the transition between the two landscapes, and looks back toward the boulders. From this perspective, they form a dark mass against the sky, their individual shapes merging into a single silhouette. The hidden pool lies somewhere within that darkness, invisible from here, known only to the watcher and to whatever creatures make their home in its deep water. The watcher feels a quiet gratitude for having found that place, for having sat beside it in stillness, even as they turn away and continue walking along the shore. The tide has changed. The watcher notices this in the way the waves are reaching now, slightly higher on the rocks than before, finding channels and depressions that were dry earlier in the night. The turn has been gradual, imperceptible in any single moment, but comparing the current state with memory of earlier hours, the change is clear. The tide is coming in, beginning its slow climb toward the high water mark. This incoming tide brings subtle changes to the pools. Those that were isolated now receive fresh influxes of seawater with each wave. The water level rises slightly, temperature adjusts, salinity normalizes. The pools that seem so separate, so distinct from the ocean, are revealed as temporary separations, connected still to the greater body of water that defines this place. With the rising tide, that connection becomes more evident, more active. The watcher finds a pool that is currently receiving water from the incoming waves. With each surge, water flows over a low lip of rock and drops into the pool below, creating a small waterfall that lasts for the few seconds while the wave crests. The watcher sits beside this pool watching the cycle, the wave arriving, water flowing over the lip, the brief cascade, then the cessation as the wave retreats and the lip is exposed again. The sound of this intermittent waterfall is soothing, a gentle splashing that rises and falls with the waves. The watcher listens to it with full attention, hearing not just the overall sound but the components within it. The initial rush as water begins to flow, the steady pour as the cascade reaches its peak, the diminishing trickle as the wave retreats, and finally the silence before the next wave arrives. Each phase has its own quality, its own texture of sound. The pool is coming alive with the fresh water. Small shrimp-like creatures that were barely visible before now swim more actively, energized by the influx of cooler, more oxygenated water. The watcher can see them darting about, their translucent bodies nearly invisible except for the tiny shadow each one casts on the pool's bottom. They move with remarkable speed, accelerating and stopping, changing direction instantly, their small bodies perfectly adapted to life in the water column. A larger creature appears, a fish, perhaps 4 inches long, moving more deliberately than the shrimp. The fish swims near the surface, its dorsal fin occasionally breaking through into the air, creating tiny ripples. It seems to be feeding, mouth opening and closing rhythmically, perhaps taking in the small organisms that have been stirred up by the incoming water. The watcher observes this small ecosystem in transition, watching how the influx of fresh seawater affects the pool's inhabitants, how it brings not just water but energy, oxygen, perhaps nutrients and tiny prey organisms swept in from the ocean. The pool is not a static container but a dynamic system, constantly exchanging with its environment, constantly changing even as it maintains its essential identity as a pool, a basin of water held by stone. The moon continues its descent toward the western horizon. Its light, though still bright, now comes from an angle that creates longer shadows, a different quality of illumination. The watcher's own shadow stretches away to the east, elongated and distorted by the uneven ground, a dark double that moves when they move, holds still when they are still. The watcher stands and walks to the water's edge, where waves are breaking against the rocks. The tide is noticeably higher now, reaching points that were well above the waterline hours ago. The ocean seems more present, more active, its energy more apparent in the larger waves, the stronger surges, the spray that rises higher when water strikes stone. The watcher stands at this boundary, feet planted firmly on rock, body swaying slightly with each wave's impact as vibrations travel through the stone. The waves arrive with rhythmic regularity, their timing predictable enough that the watcher can anticipate each one, can watch it approach across the dark water, can brace slightly as it strikes the rocks and sends spray into the air. A particularly large wave arrives, larger than those before it. The watcher sees it coming, sees the way it rises as it approaches the shallowing bottom, sees the way moonlight catches on its crest. The wave breaks against the rocks with unusual force, sending spray flying, and for a moment the watcher is enveloped in a fine mist of seawater. The sensation is startling, the sudden wetness, the cold, the taste of salt on the lips. Then the spray settles, and the watcher is left standing on damp rock, clothes spotted with moisture, face wet with seawater. The watcher does not retreat from this exposure. Instead, they remain at the boundary, accepting that standing here means occasionally being touched by the ocean's spray, occasionally feeling its cold wetness. There is something exhilarating about this acceptance, about standing in a place where the boundary between land and sea is so permeable, where water and air mix in the spray zone, where being dry is only temporary and wetness is to be expected. Another large wave approaches, and another. The watcher remains in place, receiving the spray when it comes, standing in mere dampness when it does not. The body adjusts to the wetness, accepting it as the current condition. The mind, which might under other circumstances find the dampness uncomfortable, remains quiet, observing without complaint, without wishing things were different than they are. After several minutes at the water's edge, the watcher turns and walks back among the rocks, leaving the zone of spray behind. The wetness on their clothing and skin begins to dry in the cool air, evaporating slowly, drawing heat from the body as it does so. The watcher feels this cooling, this transformation of liquid water back into vapor, and accepts it as part of the experience of the night. A shallow pool appears, spread across a broad expanse of flat rock. The water here is only inches deep, spread thin, and it reflects the sky like a sheet of silver laid upon the stone. The watcher walks to the edge of this pool but does not stop. Instead, they step into it, walking slowly through the shallow water, feeling it flow around their feet and ankles with each step. The sensation of walking through water is different from walking on stone. There is resistance, a gentle pushing back against each movement, and there is the sound of displacement, the soft splash and gurgle of water moving aside. The watcher walks slowly across the entire expanse of the shallow pool, taking perhaps 24 steps to cross it, feeling the water with each one, the coolness, the slight pressure, the yielding quality that is so different from the solidity of rock. Emerging on the far side, the watcher pauses and looks back at the trail they've left, ripples spreading outward from each footprint, patterns of disturbance that gradually fade as the water settles back to stillness. In a minute or two, all trace of the passage will be gone, the water smooth again, and it will be as if the watcher had never crossed this pool. There is something peaceful about this erasure, about the way water holds no memory, maintains no record. Each moment is fresh, unburdened by the past. The watcher continues walking, their wet feet leaving dark prints on the dry rock that fade quickly as the water evaporates. The body is fully awake now despite the tiredness, energized by the coolness of the water, by the spray at the ocean's edge, by the accumulated experience of the night. There is a clarity to this wakefulness, a sharpness of perception that comes from sustained attention, from hours of watching without distraction. Another pool comes into view, this one medium-sized and roughly oval, nestled in a depression that makes it deeper than it is wide. The watcher approaches and kneels beside it, looking down into water that is clear enough to see the bottom despite the depth. A sea star rests on the bottom, its 5 arms spread wide, its tube feet visible as pale dots along the underside of each arm. The creature is motionless, as sea stars tend to be, its movement too slow for the human eye to detect over short periods. The watcher watches this sea star, appreciating its alien geometry, the 5-fold symmetry that is so different from the bilateral symmetry of most animals. There is something deeply calming about observing such a creature, something that quiets the usual patterns of thought and allows the mind to simply rest in observation. The sea star exists, perfectly adapted to its environment, pursuing its slow life on the bottom of tidal pools, and the watcher exists, perfectly adapted to observation, to sitting beside pools and watching what lives within them. Minutes pass. The sea star does not move, or moves so slowly that no change is visible. The watcher's mind grows very quiet, thoughts occurring less and less frequently, the space between thoughts growing longer. There is just the watching, just the pool, just the sea star on the bottom, just the moonlight falling through clear water. Everything is simple. Everything is sufficient. Everything is exactly as it should be. The watcher remains kneeling beside the pool for a long while after noticing the sea star, allowing the stillness to deepen without interruption. The rock beneath their knees is cool and slightly damp, but the sensation barely registers. Attention rests almost entirely with the water, with the subtle play of light and shadow on the pool's bottom, with the slow breathing of the night itself. Eventually, without any clear decision having been made, the watcher rises. The movement is slow, deliberate, as though disturbing the air as little as possible. The sea star remains where it is, unchanged by the watcher's presence or departure, continuing its existence at a pace so gradual it feels timeless. The watcher resumes walking, moving farther along the shoreline. Here the rocks are flatter, worn smooth by centuries of tides and storms. Each step lands securely, the soles of the watcher's feet finding natural contours in the stone, places shaped almost as if for this purpose. The rhythm of walking returns, step, shift, step, a gentle cadence that mirrors the waves breaking farther out. The tide continues its quiet advance. Pools that were once isolated are now merging, thin streams of water connecting one basin to another. The watcher observes how these connections form and dissolve, how channels appear briefly and then vanish as the water rises. What was separate becomes shared, what was still begins to move, and yet the overall character of the shore remains unchanged. The watcher pauses beside one of these newly connected pools and watches the water flow between them. The movement is subtle, barely perceptible unless watched closely. A slight current forms, carrying tiny particles, grains of sand, fragments of shell, bits of organic matter, from one pool to the next. The watcher follows these particles with their eyes, noticing how some settle quickly while others remain suspended, drifting until the current weakens. A small crab emerges from a crevice between rocks, its movements cautious and precise. It pauses, raises one claw slightly, then scuttles sideways toward the water's edge. The watcher remains still, offering no disturbance. After a moment, the crab slips into the pool, disappearing beneath the surface with barely a ripple. The watcher feels a quiet satisfaction in witnessing this small decision, this brief moment of movement in an otherwise unhurried night. Farther along, the shoreline curves gently inward, forming a small cove. The waves here arrive with less force, their energy softened by the shape of the land. The water laps rather than crashes, producing a sound that is lower, more subdued. The watcher walks into this cove and stands near the edge, listening to the difference. The ocean speaks in many voices, and this one is calm, almost conversational. The moon, now lower in the sky, casts a different kind of light. Shadows are longer, more pronounced. The texture of the rocks becomes more apparent, every ridge and hollow outlined by contrast. The watcher runs a hand lightly over the stone beside them, feeling its smoothness, the faint traces of shells embedded long ago, the cool solidity that has endured countless nights like this one. The watcher sits again, this time on a broad, flat rock that slopes gently toward the water. From here, the view opens outward, offering an unobstructed line of sight across the dark sea. The horizon is indistinct, the boundary between water and sky blurred by cloud cover, but the watcher senses its presence nonetheless, an imagined line separating two vast elements. Breathing slows further, becoming almost imperceptible. Each inhale is quiet, each exhale softer still. The body seems to settle more deeply into itself, weight distributed evenly, muscles releasing what little tension remains. The watcher feels neither alert nor drowsy, but something in between, a state of wakeful rest that feels perfectly suited to this place and hour. The soundscape shifts subtly as the tide continues to rise. The intervals between waves shorten slightly, the water reaching farther up the rocks with each arrival. The watcher notices how familiar sounds take on new qualities as conditions change, how the same wave, meeting a different arrangement of stone, produces a different note, a different resonance. Nothing repeats exactly, even in repetition. A faint breeze moves across the surface of the pools, stirring ripples that distort the moon's reflection into wavering patterns. The watcher watches these patterns form and dissolve, finding no need to interpret them, no impulse to assign meaning. They exist briefly, beautifully, and then they are gone, replaced by stillness once more. Time passes without marking itself. The watcher has no sense of how long they have been sitting, nor any concern about it. The night feels expansive, generous, offering more than enough room for stillness, for observation, for quiet being. The thought of hours and minutes feels distant, irrelevant. Eventually, the watcher stands again and begins to move inland, away from the immediate edge of the water. The rocks here rise slightly, forming low terraces that step up from the shore. From this higher vantage point, the pattern of pools and channels becomes clearer, a complex network shaped by the interplay of stone and sea. The watcher looks back across this landscape, appreciating its quiet order, its balance between structure and change. The ocean continues its work below, steady and patient. The tide will reach its peak later, and then, just as quietly, it will begin to withdraw. The watcher knows this without thinking about it, carrying the knowledge as part of the body rather than the mind. With slow, measured steps, the watcher continues along the coast, following the curve of the land, remaining present, remaining unhurried, allowing the night to unfold one moment at a time. The watcher moves slowly along the higher terrace, the sound of the ocean now slightly more distant, softened by the rise in elevation. From here, the shoreline reveals itself in layers. Pools below, rock shelves above, and beyond them the darker mass of land that slopes gently away from the sea. The watcher pauses occasionally, not from fatigue but from a natural inclination to stop and observe, to allow the surroundings to register fully. From this vantage point, the rhythm of the tide is easier to perceive. The watcher can see the water advancing in subtle increments, reaching higher points on the rocks, slipping into depressions that were previously untouched. The movement is steady, deliberate, without urgency. It does not rush to claim new ground, nor does it hesitate. It simply arrives, wave by wave, fulfilling its role. The air here feels different, slightly drier, less saturated with salt spray. A faint scent of stone and earth mingles with the ocean's presence, suggesting the proximity of land beyond the immediate shore. The watcher breathes deeply, noticing how the air cools the lungs, how it moves easily in and out without effort. Each breath feels complete in itself, requiring nothing more. A low outcrop extends toward the sea, and the watcher walks out onto it, careful with each step. The stone narrows here, forming a natural platform that hovers above the water. Below, waves slide past, their surfaces catching brief flashes of moonlight before dissolving back into darkness. The watcher stands at the edge, looking down, feeling the height not as danger but as perspective. From above, the water's movement appears slower, its patterns broader and more unified. Individual waves blend into a larger, continuous motion, rising and falling with a steadiness that feels reassuring. The watcher watches for a long while, allowing the mind to follow the movement without commentary, without the impulse to understand or explain. Eventually, the watcher sits, legs extended comfortably, hands resting loosely on the stone. The rock still holds the day's residual warmth, faint but noticeable against the coolness of the night air. The contrast is gentle, grounding, a reminder of the slow exchange between light and dark, warmth and coolness, that defines this hour. Some distance away, a seabird calls once, its voice echoing briefly before fading. The sound does not startle the watcher. It arrives naturally, joins the soundscape, and then leaves like everything else. Silence returns, deeper for having been briefly interrupted. The moon is now noticeably lower, its light softer, its presence less commanding than earlier in the night. The watcher observes how this change affects the shore, how reflections dim slightly, how shadows lose some of their sharpness. The world seems to relax further as the night progresses, easing toward the quiet hours before dawn. The watcher stands again and retraces a few steps back along the terrace, moving toward a narrow path that leads inland. The path is barely visible, marked more by habit and familiarity than by any clear boundary. Stones here are smaller, looser underfoot, and the watcher adjusts their pace accordingly, placing each foot with care. Along this path, small plants cling to crevices in the rock, their forms barely distinguishable in the low light. The watcher kneels briefly to touch one, fingers brushing cool leaves that hold the night's moisture. The plant does not react, does not change. It remains, quietly rooted, continuing its slow existence regardless of observation. The watcher rises and continues, eventually reaching a point where the sound of the ocean becomes a background presence rather than a dominant one. Here, the night feels more enclosed, shaped by rock and land rather than open water. The wind is gentler, moving in small currents that shift direction unpredictably. The watcher notices how these subtle changes in environment influence awareness, drawing attention inward even as the senses remain open. Finding a sheltered hollow between stones, the watcher settles once more, resting against a rock face that blocks the breeze. From this position, the view of the sea is partial, glimpsed through gaps rather than spread wide. The watcher does not mind this narrowing. It feels appropriate, a natural progression from the openness of earlier hours. Time continues to pass, unmarked by thought. The watcher's awareness drifts easily between sensations, the feel of stone against the back, the faint sound of water moving below, the steady rhythm of breathing. Thoughts arise only occasionally, brief and unremarkable, dissolving almost as soon as they appear. The night deepens further, though the watcher could not say exactly how. It is not darker so much as quieter, more settled. The tide continues its patient climb, unseen from this spot, but felt in the changing sound of the sea. Everything proceeds according to its nature, without instruction, without oversight. The watcher remains in the sheltered hollow for a long while, content with the partial view it offers. From here, the sea is no longer something to be watched directly but something to be sensed, heard in the softened rhythm of waves, felt in the faint vibration that travels through stone and earth, known through experience rather than sight. The watcher allows this indirect presence to settle into awareness, finding it just as calming as the open view had been earlier. The air in this hollow feels slightly warmer, held and protected by the surrounding rock. The watcher notices how even small changes in temperature register clearly now, the body having become finely attuned through hours of quiet attention. There is no urge to adjust or seek greater comfort. The body accepts the conditions as they are, resting easily within them. After some time, the watcher stands and moves again, leaving the hollow behind. The path continues gently upward, away from the shore, and the watcher follows it at an unhurried pace. Each step feels deliberate but effortless, guided by familiarity rather than conscious planning. The ground here is firmer, less affected by the tide's reach, and the watcher senses the growing distance from the water even without turning to look. At the top of the rise, the land levels out into a broad, open stretch of rock and sparse grass. The moonlight reaches this place more freely, unobstructed by cliffs or outcrops. The watcher pauses at the edge of this open space, allowing the shift in environment to register fully. The openness feels different from the shore, quieter in another way, less dynamic, more settled. The watcher walks out into this space and stands still, letting the night surround them from all sides. The sound of the ocean is now faint, a distant murmur rather than a presence. In its place, other sounds become noticeable: the whisper of wind through dry grass, the subtle movement of air across stone, the near silence that lies beneath everything. The sky above appears broader here, the clouds moving steadily across it, their shapes slowly changing as they pass. The watcher looks up, following one cloud as it drifts, noticing how its edges soften and reform, how it thins in places and thickens in others. The movement is slow enough to feel almost static, yet unmistakably present. The watcher lies down on the rock, choosing a place where the surface slopes gently, offering support without pressure. The stone beneath is cool and firm, grounding. From this position, the sky fills the field of view completely. The watcher's breathing synchronizes naturally with the rhythm of observation, slow, even unforced. From this vantage point, the watcher notices how the light changes again. The moon, now lower still, casts a paler glow, diffused by the cloud cover. The brightness is subdued, gentle, enough to illuminate without overwhelming. Shadows are soft now, their edges blurred, merging into one another. The watcher's awareness begins to feel expansive, stretching outward and upward, encompassing sky and land together. The sense of being a separate observer diminishes slightly, replaced by a quieter feeling of participation, of simply being present within the landscape rather than apart from it. A brief stirring of wind passes over the open ground, moving the grass in a slow wave. The watcher feels it brush across skin and clothing, notices how it cools, and then moves on. The moment passes without leaving any trace beyond memory, and even that begins to fade almost immediately. Time becomes increasingly difficult to measure. The watcher has no sense of how long they have been lying here, nor any concern about it. The night feels abundant, offering more than enough space for rest, for awareness, for quiet existence. Eventually, the watcher sits up again, the movement unhurried. The body feels calm and balanced, neither tired nor alert, existing comfortably in between. The watcher looks once more toward the direction of the sea, though it is mostly hidden from view. The knowledge of its presence is enough. The watcher stands and begins to walk slowly back toward the path, retracing steps without urgency. The night continues to hold steady, offering no resistance, no demands. Everything feels aligned, as though the night itself is guiding the pace, setting the rhythm. The tide continues its unseen rise below. The clouds continue their slow passage overhead, and the watcher moves on, present, unhurried, allowing the quiet watch to continue. The watcher follows the path downward once more, returning gradually toward the sound of the sea. The movement feels natural, as though guided by the slope of the land itself rather than by intention. Each step brings a subtle change in the air. The faint scent of salt grows stronger, the coolness deepens, and the distant murmur of water becomes clearer again. As the shoreline comes back into view, the watcher notices how different it appears now compared to earlier in the night. The tide has risen considerably, reshaping the familiar terrain. Pools that once lay far apart have merged into wider sheets of water, their boundaries softened or erased entirely. Rocks that stood exposed hours ago now sit partially submerged, their edges blurred by the steady motion of the sea. The watcher pauses at the edge of a broad, shallow basin that did not exist before. What was once a series of smaller pools has become a single, expansive surface reflecting the muted glow of the sky. The water here moves slowly, responding to the larger motion of the tide rather than to individual waves. Its surface undulates gently, creating long, unbroken ripples that drift across the stone. The watcher sits beside this new pool and watches the water's movement without expectation. The mind no longer seeks detail as it once did. There is no urge to identify creatures or track individual patterns. Awareness has grown broader, softer, content to receive the scene as a whole rather than in parts. Occasionally, a small wave pushes farther into the basin, raising the water level by a fraction before retreating again. The change is subtle, barely noticeable unless watched closely, yet it carries a sense of inevitability. The tide is nearing its fullness now, approaching the quiet peak that precedes its eventual turning. The soundscape has changed as well. The sharper splashes and trickles of earlier hours have given way to deeper, more continuous tones. Water now flows in longer arcs, meeting stone with less interruption. The watcher listens to this shift, noticing how it affects the body, how the slower rhythm encourages stillness, how the deeper sounds seem to settle into the chest rather than the ears. The watcher stands and walks along the edge of the basin, following its curve. Footsteps are careful, deliberate, placed where stone remains exposed. Reflections move with each step, responding to the watcher's presence and then smoothing out again. There is a quiet satisfaction in watching these disturbances fade, in seeing the water reclaim its calm so quickly. Farther along, the watcher reaches a familiar cluster of rocks, now transformed by the higher tide. Channels that once required careful stepping are submerged, their paths indicated only by the direction of the current. The watcher studies these flows, tracing them visually as they weave between stone, noting where water gathers and where it moves on. A sense of completeness settles in. Not an ending, but a fullness, the feeling that the night has unfolded as it needed to, revealing each stage in its own time. The watcher feels no desire to revisit earlier places or repeat earlier observations. What has been seen. What remains will reveal itself without effort. The watcher climbs onto a higher rock and sits, allowing the water to move below without interference. From here, the tide's presence is undeniable. The sea feels closer now, more encompassing, its reach extended far beyond its earlier boundaries. And yet, there is no threat in this closeness, only a calm assertion of rhythm and balance. The sky above remains softly clouded, the moon now a pale suggestion behind layers of moving gray. Light is diffused evenly across land and water, erasing harsh contrasts. Everything appears gentler in this light, as though edges themselves have relaxed. The watcher's breathing slows further, aligning with the environment in a way that feels effortless. Each inhale draws in cool, damp air. Each exhale releases it quietly without sound. The body feels light, supported, perfectly matched to the stillness of the hour. For a long time, the watcher does nothing at all. The tide holds near its height. The water rests against stone. The night remains open, patient, unhurried. The watcher remains present, aware, and calm, waiting without expectation, knowing that the final movement of the night will arrive in its own time. The watcher remains seated on the higher rock as the tide holds its fullness. The water no longer advances with any noticeable urgency. Instead, it lingers, pressing softly against stone, filling every hollow it has reached, resting there as though content to remain. The sense of motion that defined the earlier hours has eased into something quieter, slower, almost suspended. From this vantage point, the shoreline feels complete, settled into a temporary equilibrium. Pools are no longer forming or merging. Channels no longer shift. Everything has found its place, at least for now. The watcher senses this pause not as stillness but as balance, a moment where opposing movements meet and rest together. The sound of the sea reflects this balance. Waves arrive evenly without emphasis, their timing consistent, their impact gentle. There are no sudden crashes, no sharp splashes, only the steady breathing of water meeting stone and withdrawing again. The watcher listens without effort, the sound passing through awareness rather than demanding attention. The sky above has softened further. The moon, now mostly obscured, offers only a faint brightness behind the cloud cover, a diffuse glow that seems to come from everywhere at once. The land and sea are lit evenly, without shadow or contrast, as though the night itself has exhaled and relaxed its grip. The watcher shifts position slightly, not from discomfort but from instinct, allowing the body to settle more fully. Muscles release the last traces of holding. The spine aligns naturally. The weight of the body feels evenly distributed, supported by stone that has held countless nights just like this one. Breathing becomes slower still. Each breath feels unremarkable, ordinary, complete. There is no sense of drawing air in or pushing it out, only the quiet exchange between body and night, a gentle participation in the larger rhythm of the world. The watcher's thoughts have grown sparse. When they arise, they do so faintly, like distant ripples that smooth themselves almost immediately. There is no desire to follow them, no curiosity about where they might lead. Awareness rests comfortably in sensation, the sound of water, the coolness of air, the solidity of rock. The tide begins its subtle turn. The change is not immediately visible, but it can be felt. A slight easing of pressure, a barely perceptible shift in the water's behavior. The watcher notices how a thin line of stone near the basin's edge begins to emerge again, glistening briefly before drying in the night air. The sea has reached its limit and is beginning, quietly, to release. This retreat is unhurried, respectful. The water does not rush away from the land. It simply loosens its hold, inch by inch, allowing gravity and rhythm to guide it back. The watcher observes this with calm acceptance, knowing that this turning is as much a part of the night as the rising had been. The sound of the sea changes once more, deepening slightly, gaining a new cadence. Where water once pressed upward, it now draws back, creating soft, elongated echoes among the rocks. The watcher listens, recognizing the continuity in this change, the way the night moves forward without ever truly leaving anything behind. Eventually, the watcher stands. The movement is slow and deliberate, carried out with the same care that has defined the entire watch. From standing height, the shore appears different again, familiar yet transformed by the tide's full journey. The watcher takes a final look across the pools and channels, across water and stone now settling into a new arrangement. There is no sense of conclusion, only completion. The watcher turns slightly inland, stepping away from the edge without haste. The sea remains present, audible, steady, continuing its quiet work regardless of observation. The night continues as well, holding its calm even as it prepares to give way to the earliest hints of morning. With measured steps, the watcher moves onward, carrying nothing away from the shore except awareness itself, unburdened, unmarked, at rest. Behind them, the water withdraws slowly. Above, the sky remains soft and quiet, and the night completes its gentle watch.